The reality of the world is that we live in a world which is more volatile, uncertain, complex. As architects, we need to adapt to that, to unlock the next chunk of value in the software development process. I just want to differentiate the activities that lead to an architecture versus the architecture itself. The most important aspect of architecture is decision-making. And it's this collaborative decision-making process that leads to the definition of an architecture that I really look at.
So first of all, thank you, Vincenzo, for being here for this short conversation on your participation at the Software Architecture Gathering. So thanks for your time in advance.
Thank you. Thank you.
For everyone to know who I'm talking to, can you introduce yourself? Like, what is your day job, Vincenzo?
First of all, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Vincenzo Marchese, and my day job now is to be an architect. I'm an independent consultant, and I quite fluidly between software architecture, solution architecture, but more recently, predominantly enterprise architecture. I'm from Sicily originally, but I moved here in London in 1995, and London is my home now. I did get used to the weather. Yeah, so I consult mainly for large, complex organizations, and I help them to solve challenges in the way they architect large IT systems.
So first, for the gathering itself, it will be in November in Berlin. So you probably know Berlin. You've been there before?
I've never been to Berlin, and I'm actually really excited to be there. You know, I come originally from a small town in Sicily. So I remember when I came to London first, it was quite a big shock. And I'm really, really looking forward to be there. In fact, I've taken a couple of extra days so that I can enjoy the city beyond just being there for the 4 days of the conference.
For the conference, are you looking for any particular topics you want to catch up yourself on, or particular speakers you're looking forward to?
Well, there's such an excellent lineup. I mean, people that I really admired for a long time. In fact, when I first looked at the lineup for the speakers, I thought a little bit, oh dear, you know, I'm a little bit, maybe I'm punching a little bit above my weight here. But no, listen, looking to learn from some outstanding speakers, practitioners, as well as theoreticians. Obviously, learn a lot from the practitioners in the room. You know, I always say that, you know, this are great opportunity to exchange ideas. And if you walk away, you know, sometimes with 3-4 gold, you know, nuggets, I think, you know, that's my aim for it. But, you know, being in the same room and being in the same stage as some illustrious speakers, I think that would be, you know, that's really my primary aim.
Are you, in general, a regular conference attendee?
You know, Richard, I haven't been in the past. I absolutely love the experiences of going to conferences. In the past, I didn't have the opportunity to attend many conferences because of the demands of my roles. I am looking to do more, but definitely one of the conferences that I've always been interested in the past, and I've been following it for a number of years, is the Software Architecture Gathering. And I was absolutely delighted early this year, to have been given the opportunity to attend and present to this one. But I'm hoping that in the future, as I grow a little bit older with more white hair, I'll have more time to attend more conferences in the future.
And now for your particular session, decision-centric architecting. What struck me about it was, it's already in the title, is this verb, architecting. Which probably is not in any dictionary. So kind of, what do you mean with it?
I just want to differentiate the activities that lead to an architecture versus the architecture itself. Often, you know, I've heard many people using these terms interchangeably, but I think that it's really important to distinguish the set of activities that you do when you design an architecture versus the artifacts, the model that you create to describe the architecture itself. So I wanted on purpose to create these differentiations. The talk will cover architecting as a process, and specifically what I think is the most important aspect of architecting, which is decision making. Ultimately, as architect, it's not the models, the diagrams that we produce that create value. In my experience, is actually the decisions that we make, either individually as software architects, but more often as collaboratively with other people, whether they're stakeholders, engineers, and is this collaborative decision-making process that leads to the definition of an architecture that I really look at, and I will try and unpack in the talk in Berlin in November.
Since you talk about like artifact-centric architecting, when you think of this term, what typical artifacts are you thinking of there that might be overvalued in your opinion?
Well, I think traditionally, and if you look at also the academic published papers on the subject, I think traditionally this has evolved, and there's been a period where people would focus a lot on creating, whether it's data models or context diagrams or physical views of the system that you're creating. And the focus for many years has been on those type of artifacts. But in more recent years, there has been a focus on the decisions perspective. So, people talked about making the architectural decision a first-class citizen in the architecture. So that means that as well as capturing the architecture itself and what is it that needs to be built, it's really important to capture the rationale. So why, what was the decision process that led to that particular, data model or physical or infrastructure model. So this is what I'll be drilling down into. And I think this, to some degree, has been not ignored, but perhaps decisions and the rationale of decisions wasn't or hasn't been a first-class citizen for some time. And I think it's really important to focus on that. In particular, I would say, when these decisions are taken collaboratively, which is increasingly the case, particularly when we develop systems in more modern approaches like agile and product-led and so on.
Also, since you mentioned it, you've probably experienced particularly bad cases of big design upfront, I guess. Is that a motivation for your talk, that you've seen people completely overdoing this artifact-oriented design without collaboration?
In my years as an architect, both as a solution architect and an enterprise architect, I've seen architects aiming for perfections, always sometimes being too rigid on having predefined, clear, absolutely unambiguous requirements, for example. And, if you had perfectly defined and ambiguous requirements, and if the future was certain, then the best way, the most efficient way to architect systems would be doing a big design upfront. The reality of the world is that we live in a world which is more volatile, uncertain, complex. And so we need to, as architects, we need to adapt to that. So we need to, I talk about, and in the talk I will talk about just enough architecting. So what is the minimum set of architectural design decision that you need to make to unlock the next chunk of value in the software development process? So just enough architecting is exactly that. That means that you need just enough documentation, you need just enough assurance. I look at architecting also through the lens of an enterprise architect, where they're very keen at assuring that the right architectural decisions are being made. And one of the concepts when I discuss this with enterprise architects that I introduce and emphasize is just enough assurance, just enough governance. This is really, really important. And so I also cover this concept in the context of the architectural decision making.
Since you mentioned governance, sometimes people use architectural decisions also as a means to kind of document like policy, like documenting a constraint, for example, for a larger system, like a rule to be followed. Especially when you talk about enterprise architecture, you might want to impose from a macro perspective, like constraints on the work of multiple teams. Are architectural decisions a means to do this type of policy work?
when you think of architectural design decisions, they occur at various levels of abstractions. You can make a design decision as you're coding a system, or at the very highest level of abstraction, you can think of an architectural decision, for example, from an enterprise architecture perspective, where to invest, in which business capability we should invest IT budget. So these architectural decisions can happen at various levels. And at some level, they're more described as a constraint, as you suggested. In other decisions are documented and described as coding decisions. And then there is like a large spectrum in between. And I think every organization needs to define what is the range of architectural decision that particular roles, typically organizations have enterprise architect, solution architect, data architect, and so on. And so it's really important to understand in which roles some architectural decisions fit within. So the reality is not everybody can make every single architectural decision. So one of the aspects that I cover in the talk is the concept of clarifying who the decision makers are. And I use an architectural decision-making canvas, which I hope to be able to share during the talk, as a means to clarify who the decision makers are, who will benefit from the decision, what are the risks and the cost of delaying the decision. Because one of the things that I think is very important to understand for architects is that delaying a decision is a decision in itself. And see, this is why it's really important to understand that sometimes even with imperfect information, you still need to make a decision. And sometimes decisions are wrong. And, we have to live with the consequences of that, but making, suboptimal decisions often is better than making no decisions at all.
I suppose you're arguing in favor of putting decisions more at the heart of your architectural work and putting these typical artifacts like more on the secondary end of it. But you're probably not proposing to abandon all these classic artifacts, right? There is stuff that will remain even in your worldview, right?
Absolutely. I mean, many of the traditional and typical architecture artifacts remain valid. In my talk, I will discuss how, if you transition to a decision-centric view of the world, I like to think about some artifacts that support the decision-making process itself. So some artifacts that will help the decision makers to make better decisions. Mm-hmm. And then there is a set of artifacts that I think more being on the right side, which is, okay, once the decision is being made, how can we enable the execution, the implementation of that decision? So often the traditional artifacts remain valid. The main difference is that they are seen in the context of the decision. So the decision becomes the central construct, if you like. And then you have artifacts that support the decision-making process, giving the decision makers the best possible chance of making a good decisions. And then on the right-hand side, giving the implementers of the decision the best possible information to accurately implement in accordance with the original intent of the architectural decision.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo. So I'm already looking forward to seeing you in Berlin. Thank you very much for this short introduction to what you will be talking about. And I hope to see you in November.
It was my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to see you and all the participants in November as well. Thank you.